Hi, it's District Governor Sue from District 7890, Northern Connecticut, Western Mass. In a few minutes, we're going to see our trustee chair, Bill Boyd, talk to us about our Rotary Foundation. You are really going to enjoy hearing why we should support the Rotary Foundation.
It really is a pleasure for Lorna and I to be here with you tonight. The last time was a bit of a false start, and I'm only very pleased that we didn't bring any snow with us this time. And this really is a night for the family of Rotary. In the course of this evening, Lorna and I have met some past district governors and other Rotarians who have served Rotary for a very long time. And we met one young lady who has been a Rotarian for not quite 4 weeks. And so it's great to be able to talk about the Rotary Foundation. I thought probably I should give you my little elevator speech that I use when people say to me, "Now, what's the Rotary Foundation?" There are 1.2 million Rotarians in almost every country around the world. And those of us who come from countries which are fortunate and where we can afford to make a contribution to others, we give it through our Rotary Foundation. And it goes through the foundation to the Rotarians who are working in areas that are developing countries that have very significant needs. And so really our Rotary Foundation is just the way that we support Rotary in so much of its international service. And in a way, when you give to the Rotary Foundation, you don't give to the Rotary Foundation, you really give to the work of the Rotary Foundation. And you can just about say that while you go up 3 floors in the elevator. And then you hope that you catch up with the people at coffee break and they want to ask you some more questions. And probably the obvious first question is going to be, well, this Rotary Foundation of yours, what does it do? Well, of course, that's a harder one to answer because we do so very much. We do thousands of projects every year. But let's take a couple of examples. There was a Rotary Club in the States that paired with a Rotary Club in Peru. And they went to visit a group of villagers and asked the people in the villages, "What's your greatest need? What can we do to help you?" And the answer they got was that we live on the banks of a river. We have plenty of water, but the water's polluted. So our greatest need, because it will impact on the health of our children, on the ability to give them an education, is that we get clean water. So the Rotary clubs, with support from the Rotary Foundation, trained local tradesmen to build biosand filters. The cost of the materials came from the foundation grant. And then they trained a group of women from within the villages in just basic sanitation, how to use the water properly, and in simple health. And so those people stayed on also as an advantage to those villages. And the final step that they took, the Rotarians, was to send in an expert to check the water quality to make sure that they had been successful. And as a Rotarian, that's the sort of thing that we like to achieve with a Rotary project, because we went to the beneficiaries and asked them what they wanted, and then we trained local tradesmen in how to build the biosand filters. And that means, of course, that you've got sustainability, because if anything goes wrong, the people who made them and put them into the homes are already on site and can fix them. And of course, we trained that group of women who then would have an ongoing impact on the life of that community. So that's the sort of thing that we do in Rotary. If you want another example, we had a club from within the States that paired with a Rotary club in Jamaica. And they believed that it would be worthwhile doing a project in St Mary's Parish. Now, the literacy rate in St Mary's Parish is around 20%. So they were going into an area which had an illiteracy rate of 80% and 85% unemployment. And if you really picture that scenario, it'll tell you something of the area that these two Rotary clubs went to work in. And they went in and talked to the people to try and establish what was the greatest need. And as they talked to the locals, it became apparent that one of the first issues which needed to be addressed was just simply feeding the children. So they started with a project which brought breakfast to 3,500 children in schools every morning, which had some side benefits. One of them was the children now started coming to school, because if you came to school you got fed. But the other thing that was very important too was that if you feed the children before you seek to educate them, you're going to be so much more effective. But they recognised that this was only a short-term solution. So they decided that the best way to address longer-term issues would be to train the children in growing their own food. Around the schools there was plenty of land, so each child was given a garden plot. And they were shown how to make compost and how to plant and how to care for a garden. And because the climate there is very hot and moist, they found that the children could get a crop in 90 days. So they went through 2 cycles of 90 days, 2 crops, and then they said to the children, now you're going to become the teachers, and we're going to come out with you to your homes, and you and us, we're going to tell your parents how they can grow food for you. And they did exactly that. They went out, they set up garden plots, they gave seeds, they passed on learning by telling people how they could actually produce their own food. And because the rain doesn't rain continuously, they recognised there would be a need for some irrigation, so they put in drums that would catch the water in the rainy season that could be used on the vegetables during the dry season. Now that too has all the elements of a good Rotary project, because firstly they found what the real needs were, and then they very sensibly worked their way through to make sure that what came at the end of their activity was a very sustainable project. So that's the sort of thing that the Rotary Foundation supports. Those are good Rotary projects. If the coffee break hasn't ended, the next question is probably one of, do you get good value for the money? And the answer to that is yes too. We have a program in which we have peace centres which are training 70 young people, young professionals, young people who can take advantage of a 2-year master's degree course in peace and conflict resolution, and that they're in universities around the world. And we sent a young man from India called Nani Mahanta to Bradford in the UK to become one of our peace scholars. He graduated and went back to Assam in India, where he was a university lecturer. And he talked to his professor and said, I believe that there is the opportunity in our university to run a course on peace and conflict resolution. And the professor said, okay, let's try it. So they ran a 6-month course in the university and found that the number of students who wanted to take part in it was just much, much greater than they had expected. So they went to the authorities in the university and said, look at the response we're getting, and we believe that we should set up a master's degree program in the university for peace and conflict resolution. So what's happened is that Rotarians funded that one man to go to Bradford University to get his degree. But what's coming from it is 25 new graduates with history degrees in peace and conflict resolution every year. And when you think about it, that's a wonderful multiplier. We often talk about the leverage of Rotary. Well, that's a very good multiplier. But if you want another example, my wife Lorna had cataract operations last year. They cost in New Zealand $4,320, and I remember how much. I think if you had 2 cataract operations in the state, you could probably put a 0 on the end of the figures actually to find what they would cost you here. But at the International Assembly, where the district governors of the following year are trained, I was approached by a district governor-elect from India, and he handed me this little colour brochure that his district had produced, listing projects that they wanted other countries to support them. And in it was the fact that they run health camps and they do cataract operations with volunteer surgeons and, of course, with Rotary volunteer support for between $20 and $30 each. Now, the difference in many ways is that the surgeon who operated on Lorna certainly wasn't a volunteer. We actually drove under the building, and I'm not sure whether it was a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, but it was a very expensive bit of motor car that was sitting there. And of course, she went into an area where there were receptionists and magazines to read, and she got given a cup of tea, in our case. And in India, you'd have that operation, and then you would be taken outside and you'd lie on the ground. But you're giving people eyesight for $20. So yes, I think we really do, in our Rotary work, give value, get value for money. At that stage, you probably need to go back to work, but if you get together again at lunchtime, the next question is, do you address the real needs? And yes, the 2 projects that I told you about first were really focused on addressing the real needs. And that's important because it's very easy to get emotional about something that you see on the television news, but then to really miss the point that we shouldn't be addressing symptoms. We've got to address the causes if we're really going to make a difference. I went to a conference in the Philippines. It was a presidential conference, and they had breakouts, and one of the breakouts was on literacy. And that's always been something that's been an interest to me, so I went to this breakout and I sat down next to an American who was working in one of the towns in the south of the Philippines. And he told me his story. He said that when he went into the town, and he had been sent there by his company, he realised that there were 3 preschools in that town. And he said they were primitive. No electricity, no running water. The sanitation was a hole out in the back in the garden. he said they were really, really basic. So he talked to the members of his new Rotary Club and said, how about we rebuild those 3 preschools? And the club said, that sounds a good idea. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back and contact my old club in the States and we can probably get some money for them. So then we called the teachers of the 3 preschools to come to a club meeting. And we told them what we were going to do. And he said they went away and they talked amongst themselves and they came back. And they said to them, we really appreciate the offer that you have made to us. But can we tell you what our number 1 priority is? Our number 1 priority is books. And he said to me, since that moment, I have always had a passion for literacy, because I came to realise that those teachers knew that for those children in their care, if they were to have any chance of an effective future, then they had to be able to read and write. And the starting point was books. So yes, we do address real needs. I met a district governor-elect from India at an institute in India, and he told me that he was president of his club when the major tsunami struck on the 26th of December 2004. And he said when they talked about it, his club said, we've heard of 2 clubs that are going to rebuild fishing villages. So how about we rebuild a fishing village? And they all agreed that that was a great idea. So they found where there were villages which had been destroyed, and they went out as a number of the members of the club and presented themselves very proudly and said, we're Rotarians and we're here to serve people and we've come to rebuild your village. And they said the interesting thing was that the fishermen tended to be standing on the outside of the group and they were talking amongst themselves. And then one of their spokesmen came up and said, we appreciate your offer and it's very good of you to come to help us. But if you will give us boats and nets, we'll rebuild our own village. And so Rotary does determine what the real needs are, so that yes, we get real value, and yes, we determine real needs. And I suppose the other question would be, do you really get a lot of support? And the answer to that's got to be yes, too. For most of you, you will know that in January, the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to the International Assembly in San Diego and announced another $50 million contribution to Rotary for use in the eradication of polio. That takes the figure from the Gates Foundation up to $405 million. 200 million of that was used by the Gates to put a little bit of pressure on us by saying, we want you to match this figure. But having said that, it's interesting the degree of faith that the Gates Foundation have in us, that the first challenge was for 100 million, and that arrived within a matter of weeks. It's a telegraphic transfer into Evanston, into RI headquarters. And I'd like to add a personal note at this point. I had the honour of representing Rotary when we negotiated this recent $50 million. We did it over a lunch. The Gates Foundation had their number 3 man, Tashi Yamada, who was heading, because he's just recently retired, all their health programs. And he and I sat over lunch, and at the end of the lunch, we stood up and we shook hands. And that's all that it takes, because the Gates Foundation trust us, and we certainly trust them. The exchange of letters between the two of us was about a page and a half long, which really just confirmed the fact that we had, each of us had agreed to make to that funding. So yes, other people do support us. And the Gates Foundation is one of those very important supporters. It's interesting because we've become very close to the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation, or Bill and Melinda, have become concerned over the fact that in our polio eradication efforts, that some of the governments around the world have got just a little tired of giving us money. And while, if you faced it realistically, Bill Gates could pay for the whole cost of eradicating polio, he doesn't think it's appropriate. And he thinks that the governments of the world have got to stand up. And he believes that the people who can best advocate with the governments of the world are Rotarians. And so there's a lot of emphasis, and we're in close communication at the moment with the Gates Foundation on our advocacy efforts, because Bill Gates recognises that we can do more as Rotarians than he can do with all of his staff. But he's not the only one who gives to us. We have a lady called Mrs. Birla from India, whose husband formed the Birla Group of companies, and they're a very significant operation. And she's not a Rotarian, and she came to Evanston to be recognised as a member of the Arch Clump Society. On the Sunday night, she had a dinner mainly for the Indian community in Chicago, and then on the Monday she came out and the staff took her through the building and talked about what they each did and the work that was being done. And when it came to the actual induction ceremony and she had the opportunity to speak, she said, "I came here to give you $250,000. But what I have seen today has impressed me so much that I want to make it $1 million." And she's since gone on to add another $4.2 million to that. She has now given us $5.2 million, and she isn't even a Rotarian. Actually, there's some other humorous little bit that goes on to the end of that. Mrs. Birla said to us, "Look, this Rotary Foundation I'm impressed with. I'll go back to India and talk to my friend Mrs. Mittal." Now, the Mittals had the largest steel manufacturing operation in India, and then they bought out the largest in Europe, which caused the common market to have a few tremors. And they have become, I would think, the largest steel company in the world. But Mrs. Birla went back home and talked to Mrs. Mittal, and Mrs. Mittal sent us $1 million. So, you know, there are people who are not Rotarians who really believe in what we do. So if you want to ask, you know, are we just 1.2 million enthusiasts working on our own, the answer is simply no. And I talked about the Arch Clump Society, or I mentioned it. It's become a very interesting situation. The largest number of donors by far are in the US. Frank, it's about 250? 260 something. The second largest number of donors come from Taiwan. Now, Taiwan's got 19,000 Rotarians. It's got 10 Rotary districts. But it's become very much the thing to do in Taiwan, if you can afford it, to make a contribution of $250,000 to the Rotary Foundation. And you better be careful, actually, because I went to a permanent fund committee meeting in Korea, and the Koreans said, "What are we going to do to raise more money?" And they didn't really have any particular ideas in mind. So I said to them, "How about you go looking for some more Arch Clump Society members in Korea, because your economy is going very well. And you've got 4 times as many Rotarians as Taiwan, but they've got 27 Arch Club Society members and you've only got 19. So they looked at each other and said, oh yeah, that would be quite a good idea. And I said, I'll tell you what, if you can get 5, we'll have a very special induction ceremony for you in June. But you need to have 5 and we'll call it Career Day. So they've really responded very well, and actually they've found 8 Arch Club Society members who will be inducted in June. The only thing is that I sort of feel I can't really tell them that the Taiwanese have got another 10 that are going to be that are going to be inducted in October, and I don't think I'm breaking the 4-way test in any way. It's just I don't think I really need to take tell the Koreans and take the shine off Career Day. So there are people who give very significantly to the Rotary Foundation. But last year, the giving to our annual programs fund was $107 million. And that's the second highest that there ever has been in the history of the Rotary Foundation. And you're talking at a time when, you know, the newspapers will tell you that there were severe economic conditions, but Rotarians still believed enough in the foundation to give to it. But what's important about it is that $107 million was made up in all sorts of amounts. People who gave $100, some who gave $1,000, some who became major donors and gave $10,000 or $25,000 or whatever it may be. But it was an accumulation of many Rotarians making a contribution to our Rotary Foundation. And if the lunch hour hasn't entirely evaporated by this time, I think there's one statement that you can make that really sums it all up. And I think it's true of why we are Rotarians. And we are Rotarians because we have come to appreciate that if you are going to live a worthwhile life, you will judge it not on what you get, but what you give. Thank you.